The plains stretched wide and golden beneath the early autumn sky, rolling out to the horizon where the sun bled slow and red each evening, but the beauty of the land brought no comfort to Ethan Hale anymore. Once, he had been a cowboy known for his warm laugh, a steady man with strong hands and a heart full of hope, living a simple life on his Wyoming ranch with his beloved wife Lydia and their bright-eyed daughter Molly, who was just 4 years old. But 3 months ago, everything changed when a sudden fever swept through their small town, taking Lydia's life before anyone had time to understand what had happened. Ethan remembered every moment of those terrible days, Lydia's labored breathing, the doctor shaking his head, Molly crying in his arms because she could not understand why her mother would not wake up. The house that once smelled of fresh bread and sounded of humming and laughter now felt hollow and cold. Every corner of it reminded Ethan of what he lost: the rocking chair Lydia used each evening, the sun-worn quilt she had stitched by hand, the soft scarf she made that Ethan now carried in his pocket like a tether to the past. Ethan tried his best to raise Molly alone, but each day was a struggle he felt he was losing. Molly missed her mother terribly, often waking from sleep calling out "Mama," and Ethan, though he tried to soothe her, felt powerless, as though grief had stolen not only his wife but his ability to be the father Molly needed. One afternoon, while Ethan stood in the kitchen attempting to braid Molly's hair for church, his thick fingers clumsy and trembling as Molly squirmed and cried, he heard the sound of wheels and hooves approaching along the dusty road. When he stepped out onto the porch, he saw a familiar figure seated on the wagon bench, back straight, hands steady on the reins. It was Clara, Lydia's younger sister. She had always been different from Lydia. Calmer, more serious, with a strength that did not need to be spoken to be felt. Her eyes, though the same hazel shade as Lydia's, carried a deeper knowledge of hardship. Clara had written Ethan after Lydia's death, offering to come help him with the house and Molly, but Ethan had not responded. He had felt ashamed, as though needing help made him weaker. Yet Clara had come anyway, because she understood him too well to wait for words he did not know how to send. Molly recognized her instantly and ran into her arms with a cry that broke whatever was left of Ethan's defenses. Clara knelt in the dirt, holding her niece close, her eyes shining with tears, and when she stood to meet Ethan's gaze, a quiet understanding passed between them. No need for explanations. "I came because she would want me here," Clara said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Ethan swallowed, his voice thick as he replied, "I didn't want to burden you." Clara shook her head firmly. "This isn't a burden. This is family." From that day, Clara moved into the house and became the silent force that kept everything from falling apart. She cooked the meals that had long grown simple and flavorless, bringing back the warm smell of bread and herbs into the kitchen. She cleaned the rooms that had gathered dust, opened the windows that had been kept shut, and tended to Molly with a gentleness that only someone who knew Lydia's heart could offer. She walked beside Ethan in the fields, helped with the livestock, and sat on the porch in the evenings while the sun dipped low behind the hills. They did not speak much about Lydia at first, but everything they did was shaped by the memory of her. Slowly, so slowly Ethan almost didn't realize it, the silence in the house softened. Molly laughed again. The house felt lived in again. And Ethan found that when he looked at Clara, something in his heart stirred that frightened him. It was not forgetting Lydia, not replacing her, but remembering that life still had room for warmth. Yet with that warmth came guilt, heavy like the sunset shadows stretching across the land. Ethan feared that moving forward meant losing Lydia twice. Clara feared that allowing herself to feel anything for Ethan would be disrespecting the sister she had loved more than anyone. And yet, neither of them could deny that their hearts had begun to beat in the same quiet rhythm, drawn together by shared grief and the need to heal together. Winter settled early on the ranch that year, laying a quiet blanket of white over the once sunlit plains and turning the world into a hush of pale silence. Ethan found himself watching Clara more often than he meant to, watching the way her breath misted in the cold as she hung laundry in the crisp air, how she brushed Molly's hair before bed with a tenderness that seemed to stitch something broken inside him back together. There was a steadiness to Clara that grounded the home, as though by simply being present, she kept the walls from collapsing under the weight of grief. Yet the warmth growing between them was something neither dared speak aloud, for Lydia's memory lingered everywhere: her rocking chair in the corner, her handwriting in a recipe journal, the dried flowers she once kept pressed between Bible pages. One evening, after a long day of cattle work in the biting cold, Ethan walked into the house to find Clara sitting by the fire, wrapped in Lydia's old quilt. For a moment, his breath caught, not because it hurt to see, but because it felt right. Clara's face, lit by the flickering glow, was thoughtful and pained in equal measure. And when Ethan sat down beside her, neither spoke, but the silence felt different than before, not heavy, but full of something unnamed and waiting. Finally, Clara broke it. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. She loved you, Ethan. I know you think loving again means letting go of her, but it doesn't. Ethan stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. I don't know how to move forward without feeling like I'm betraying her. Clara took a slow breath, fingers tracing the quilt stitching she and Lydia had worked on together as girls. I loved you first, she said, so quietly the fire seemed to swallow the words. Before Lydia ever met you, I loved you. But she saw you first. And I stepped aside because she deserved happiness. And I never regretted that. Not once. Ethan looked up sharply, surprise and sorrow twisting in him. Clara's eyes were full of tears she did not wipe away. I don't want to replace her, she whispered. I couldn't. But I also can't pretend my heart is empty. Not anymore. Ethan reached out then, slowly, gently, as though afraid the moment would shatter. He took her hand, not with passion, not with hunger, but with the quiet desperation of a man who had been alone for too long. We are the ones still here, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. And Molly needs you. And I need you too. Not instead of her. But beside her memory. Spring thawed the snow, and with it came a softer light in the house. People in town talked, as people always do, whispering behind doors and glancing over fences, but neither Ethan nor Clara paid them any mind. Their decision was not made by gossip, it was made by love, grief, and life's unrelenting need to continue. The wedding was small, held beneath the cottonwood tree where Lydia had once spent quiet mornings reading scripture and stitching. Ethan wore the same worn coat he had married Lydia in, not out of lack but out of honor. Clara stood with her hair braided simply, a white ribbon tied at the end, the same ribbon Lydia once used. Molly held Clara's hand tightly through the ceremony, her wide eyes bright and trusting. And when the vows were spoken, the wind blew gently through the branches overhead, as though Lydia herself had breathed out a blessing. After the ceremony, as everyone walked back toward the ranch house, Molly tugged on Clara's dress and looked up at her with innocent hope. Are you my new mama now? She asked. Clara knelt, her eyes warm and full of love. I've always been here for you, she said, pressing her forehead to the child's. I was just waiting for the right time. Ethan watched them with a full, aching heart. In that moment, he understood something Lydia had once whispered in her final days, don't let Molly grow afraid of love. He realized now that love does not replace, it expands. It makes room. It heals without erasing. And as the sun dipped golden across the fields, casting long warm light over the land, Ethan took Clara's hand, and together, with Molly between them, they walked into a future shaped by both grief and grace, where love had not died, it had simply changed form and learned to bloom again.